Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to my video game reviews. In today's video, we shall be continuing with my coverage of the Kirby series with the 9th Mainline Kirby game and the 20th game overall. By the way, yes, I did slip up and say that Canvas Curse was the 20th game last time. My bad, but that's because they had those promotional games that sort of messed up my count. I think it's for the best going forward to just ignore them, but that game, of course, being Kirby Squeak Squad, or as it's known in the UK, Kirby Mouse Attack. Anyway, this game, also called Kinoshino Kahi Sanjo Dogendan, which translates as Kirby of the Stars calling on the Doroth gang. What is this gang, you may ask? Well, patience, young one. Now, this game I played a lot of growing up, third only to Kirby Superstar Ultra and Kirby's Return to Dreamland, both games that I'll eventually review in time. However, it's been a while since I replayed this game. Does it still stand up, or does the mediocre reputation as the worst mainline Kirby game end up being true? Well, let us, as always, start with the developmental history of this game. Alright, so like with the past few games, there's actually been very little info on the development of this game, though some notable things include that both HAL Laboratory and Flagship Company worked on this. This would have been the last game that Flagship worked on before collapsing in June 1st, 2007. A real shame, but perhaps on a lighter note, despite being developed after the anime had finished development, there's a lot of callbacks to it in the game, including the design of Deity's castle, the monster delivery system shows up in the background of Deity's fight, as well as the halberd design, which is marooned at the bottom of the Secret Sea Stage 4. Interestingly, there was some unused stuff that was also cut from the game, including the ability to possess mini-bosses by ghost, and a reddish color variant of the Squeaker. There was also an ability that was called a block, which was likely a prototype of the final ability in the game, that being Triple Star. In the end, the game would be released first in Japan on November 2nd, 2006, then on December 4th, 2006 in North America, March 1st, 2007 in Australia, June 22nd, 2007 for the EU, with the South Korean version not being released until September 13th, 2007. And it did okay, selling 2.27 million copies, though reviews seem to have been middling to mediocre. But if that is fair, we shall learn now, as we shall be starting with reviewing the game itself, beginning, as always, with the game's story. Alright, so the story opens to Kirby about to eat a succulent strawberry shortcake when suddenly it is stolen right in front of him. Assuming that the thief must be Deity, which is understandable given that he loves to steal food, he goes off to his castle to confront the cruel curmudgeon. After beating up a deity, it turns out that he's not behind this. Instead, it is the Squeak Squad, a gang of rat thieves that we met before but are introduced here in the story. They consist of the big and fat dumb muscle Storo, Spinny, who is the agile ninja, Doc, who is the brains, and Dalroach, the leader, alongside a legion of mouse-like squeakers. They intend to steal more, but Dedede, rightfully sick of everything, picks up Dedede, holds him firmly, and flings him at the group, causing them to fall down into a hole leading into Nature Notch. From there, Kirby chases after the group of thieves, encountering and fighting foes like Miss Molly, Bon, the Fire Owl, as well as Doc and two separate mechanical contraptions, the Mecha Krako and the hermit crab-like robot Yadagain, before finally confronting Dalroach on the ice island. Kirby beats the guy and goes to open the succulent chest containing the strawberry shortcake, but suddenly Mennonite arrives and grabs the chest. Kirby chases after him into the ocean abyss, and after beating him up, Dalroach opens the chest before Kirby can get it, causing a black fog to engulf the dude, turning him into Dark Dalroach, who is like Dalroach, but darker. Kirby chases the guy into space, and in a final confrontation knocks him out, causing the dark force that possessed him to show its face. This is Patrick, or I mean the Dark Nebula, card 03 in Japan, but frankly is way lamer. Kirby beats it, and in the end, it's revealed that Mennonite took the chest to protect people from the evil, as Kirby goes home regretting not finding the cake. But then he gets his cake returned to him by the Squeak Squad, who are deeply apologetic about this whole thing, and in the end, everyone is happy. Now, I've seen a lot of people make fun of this story for being too simplistic and cartoonish or childish, and while I agree on the spectrum of Kirby story plots, it is definitely on the lighter end. I do think it's fine. I mean, Kirby games have never really had the most developed or complex plots or the most serious stakes, and well, Kirby loves food, so this is, not out of the character for him. Overall, it's fine and I actually kind of enjoy it, but I can see why some just kind of dislike it. Now let's go on to what is arguably the most important aspect of any game, the gameplay, and see if it has aged well. Alright, so on a basic level, the gameplay is what you'd expect from a Kirby platformer at this point. You can jump with the A button, float by pressing the A button multiple times, or, use the up arrow continuously after jumping. You can walk left and right using the D-pad, run by double pressing in a direction twice, duck by pressing the down arrow, slide by pressing down plus A, B, or Y, swim, press B while, underwater. You can do an air bullet by pressing B while floating, and, pressing B underwater again while underwater will create a water gun. Pressing the up arrow will allow you to, say, enter into a door or go up a ladder. By pressing B, it allows you to inhale, and holding it lets you super inhale, which is required for some big enemies. From there, you can either exhale what you've inhaled as a star bullet, or by pressing down on the D-pad, you can swallow said enemy. If said enemy has a copy ability, you can get one. And you can use the ability by pressing B, or drop it by pressing X or select. In terms of dropping the ability, luckily it's not as bad as some of the earlier games, as you kind of have to take a bit of a hit in order to actually lose your ability. as opposed to earlier games where it would take just one hit to lose it. So now let's talk about the abilities, starting with the returning ones. First, you got Fire, which is basically a flamethrower bomb that lets you toss bombs, beams that allows you to use a sort of energy whip. Cutter allows you to use a boomerang. High jump lets you jump high. Then there is, hammer that lets you pound the ground with a hammer. There's ice that lets you use, a freeze thrower. There's parasail that gives you a parasail. Sword that gives you a sword. Spark summons a field of electricity. And tornado causes Kirby to twirl around like a tornado. Wheel turns into, a wheel. Laser lets you shoot lasers. Cupid gives him a pair of wings and a bow. Ninja lets him become a ninja. UFO is overpowered. Sleep gives him narcolepsy. Throw lets him throw things. And Fighter has the most complexity in terms of the abilities, allowing you to do a Vulcan jab, uppercut, and such. Keeping it to returning capabilities is magic. However, instead of a simple screen nuke, it's actually a regular ability. Pressing B shoots out 3 pigeons. Dashing and pressing B sees Kirby throw some playing cards horizontally. Pressing up and B has him summon a sort of creepy clown that probably scares enemies to death before killing them. It can still technically do a screen nuke, but we'll return to that later. Alright, going on to the fully new copy abilities, you got first Metal, which is this game's equivalent to Stone, but honestly it's the weakest in the game. While yes, you are invulnerable to most obstacles that can harm most regular enemies, and unlike Stone you can move while in this invincible form, you're so slow, like a paraplegic in tar. It's not worth it, and it's completely worthless against any boss, both mid bosses and full on bosses. It's just awful. I mean, you can roll down the hill, but those aren't very common, so just blah. The animal ability, however, I think is amazing and is the best in the game in terms of the new ones, as you can scratch, dig, and maul enemies to death. Both offensively and utilitarian, it can be fun to experiment with as you can dig through certain dirt patches. The triple star is sort of this game's equivalent of a combination of the Star Rod and Master, in that it will be mostly used as the final boss killer against Dark Nebula, but can be utilized after the fact, as it will pretty much destroy metal blocks, remove, you know, anything that gets in your way, destroy foliage, stakes, ropes, and it's basically just super OP in that it shoots out stars up to 3 at a time, and they will circle around Kirby doing small damage when not being shot out. Night, but it's definitely one of the most forgettable of all the last battle abilities in the series still. There's also Bubble, which is kind of just okay. He shoots out these bubbles that will turn enemies into bubbled items, but that's more related to the items, so I'll talk about that later. It's just kind of okay, I guess. And sadly, the last of the 4 new abilities, Ghost, is much like Metal, pretty mediocre. Firstly, in order to unlock it, you gotta get a set of collectibles, which I'll discuss in a bit, which will then unlock the mini boss Tedhon, which is only available in certain stages. It can't use ladders or go through thin floors despite being a freaking ghost. It can't possess any mini bosses or bosses, as well as it unable to possess certain common enemies like squeakers, shotsos, or gordos. And those you can possess are either completely worthless like Waddle Dee or Malga, or are just weaker versions of abilities you already have, such as Biospark, or who functions like a weaker ninja and can't walk on water. Or, there's Heavy Knight, that's sort of like Sword, but extremely slow, and Metalon, who's even slower than regular Metal Kirby. It's honestly just kind of sad and seems like a wasted potential, but. Combo abilities also return, not being a thing since Kirby 64, the Crystal Shard, which I've reviewed in the past, so check that out if you'd like to learn more. But I have to say the implementation here is pretty lackluster. I mean, technically, you can mix any two combo abilities you get in bubble form, but you'll just get a random one, and I'll talk about that more in a little bit. No, the true combo abilities of this game are only in six varieties. There's the Fire Sword that you get from combining fire and sword, the Ice Sword from combining ice and sword, the Thunder Sword, which is a combination of sword with spark, the Ice Bomb is a combination of bomb and ice, and lastly is Thunder Bomb, which is a combination of spark and bomb. Honestly, they're pretty half baked and function like sword and regularly do, but with a different elemental, flurry added to on top. A far cry from the true variety seen in past games. It makes you wonder why they're even put in here. Plus, you can't really even use them until you find the copy ability scrolls for their respective abilities. They didn't even make a firebomb. Like, why not? Napalm is awesome. Speaking of which, the ability scrolls are one of several items found within treasure chests, which I'll return to in a bit. There's one for each of the 24 abilities, excluding the triple star. However, despite the 24 unique sprites, only 9 were used in game. A really odd decision, and yeah. As for the upgrades themselves, there's quite the range. The animal one lets you drill in any direction, beam gets a lot more powerful, ninja, hammer, spark, laser, cutter, throw, and cupid all just get more powerful in general. Magic scroll allows it to use its, screen nuke, but you do lose the ability if you use it. Sleep can now actually heal some health, which means it's actually slightly useful to a very small extent. For other abilities like fire, ice, wheel, and tornado, their additions are very minor and honestly are kind of forgettable. Fighter gets some additional techniques, but those are techniques you could use in previous games without an upgrade, so I don't really count it as one. Speaking of items, treasure chests return, and I have to say they are a massive improvement compared to those seen in Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, as none of them have any, health items or extra lives. Usually there's a 3 in each stage, though sometimes, especially in the first world, there's less. The large ones always get the attention of the Squeak Squad, though the small ones can be grabbed as well. These treasures can contain a great number of things, including the aforementioned ability scrolls. There are these spray paints that can, change Kirby's color, all returned from the last game. Though the grape option here is more saturated than last time, plus there are 5 entirely new ones. Shadow is a reference to Shadow Kirby from Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. Ivory is a cream color. Citrus is my favorite of the new ones, as it's a very bright neon green. White is white, and lavender is a deeper purple. There's the jukebox and the notes, which you can play music once they're unlocked. Vitality returns and increases your max health. Star seals, which must be collected to unlock the pre-ultimate level Secret Sea. There are hidden door keys that unlock secret stages for each level. There are pieces of a secret map that unlock the copyability room of this game. There's puzzle pieces that reveal images when collected. And lastly, we got the pieces of the Ghost Medallion, which completed upon doing so or unleash the ghost, Ted Hahn, which I'll return to in a bit. In addition, you got, non items found in chests that are just sort of laying there, like food items that will heal a little, maximum potatoes that are full heal. You got, energy drinks that sort of heal a middling amount, and extra lives that give, well, extra lives. Treasure chests that you collect will be held in your stomach. Sounds odd, but this was the basis for a few episodes in the Kirby anime, and this is where the DS touchscreen is implemented. And you can hold these bubbles, which themselves can hold items or healing stuff. And Admittedly, I've seen some people say that compared to the last game, the touchscreen wasn't really implemented all that much, but I don't know. I think that attaching a touchscreen to a solid platformer is probably better than trying to make an entire, you know, platformer that uses touchscreen controls. It just allows for a lot more precise controls. And, there's also where the bubble ability that I mentioned earlier really comes into use, as you can turn sort of, these, you know, enemies into abilities which you can then hold. Sadly, due to the fact that most levels have three treasure chests, in most cases, if you're going to get them all, you're only going to really be limited to two slots. So it's greatly limited most times. I really think they could have maybe made it a little bigger, but maybe then it would have been too easy. But there's also this trophy you get for beating each boss, but they're basically just bragging rights and are very easily collected. All of this stuff can be accessed by the menu using the touchscreen, which is also used for the majority of the sub-games. Speaking of the sub-games, there are four here. Boss Endurance is pretty self-explanatory. It is an arena boss rush type thing. It only has one difficulty level, but the remaining three all have three different levels of difficulty: easy, medium, and hard. Speedy Tea Time is sort of a spiritual successor to the minigame Speed Eaters from Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, but here, instead of facing just other Kirby NPCs/players, you also have the fat mouse guy, Storo. It's fun, but like with the other two mini games, I think you only get the most out of it with multiple players, which you can do via the DS wireless play. The third mini game is Smash Ride, where you try to sort of sumo push people or members of the Squeak Squad off the arena. It's rather fun. And fourthly, we got Treasure Shot, where you have to compete against Doc to shoot orbs at treasure chests. It's actually rather engaging as you have to slide your stylus rapidly in order to hit the treasure. Overall, I would say the gameplay of this game is pretty solid. Sure, some aspects are kind of less prominent than before, or somewhat poorly implemented, as is the case in the combo abilities, but I think it offers itself as a solid platformer, so I don't really mind some of the flaws. I did find some of the new abilities to be kind of disappointing for the most part, but none are absolutely horrible. They're just kind of inferior to the classics. Now let's go on to the presentation of the game, starting with the most obvious half, the graphics. Alright, so on a basic level, this game borrows a lot from the style of Kirby's Nightmare Dreamland, which was a remake of the original Kirby's Adventure. I've reviewed both those games before if you'd like to learn more, but I still think it manages to have some charm of its own. And each level, which is divided into a number of stages, does sort of stand out. Prism Plain starts out as sort of a greens type area that introduces the basics. Though I love how, as you go further in this world, you enter into Castle Deity and sort of engage in a siege. And there's a lot of visual references to the anime here. The next level/world, Nature Notch, takes place mostly underground with some gorgeous crystalline areas, especially in Stage 5. Cushy Clouds is a mountainous/cloudy area, and Stage 5 is set sort of in an active tornado, which is honestly very awesome. Jam Jungle is a tropical jungle inspired world, and I do love this sort of vegetation here. There's also this strange mechanical ruins that have a very clear Aztec inspiration to them and are, built over one of these ancient ruins, which is just kind of cool. Vocal Volcano is indeed a hot place, so the first stage is strangely cool, but not as cool as Ice Island, which is a very frigid and nicely designed area with a lot of, ice based areas and ice fortresses. Secret Sea is a tropical paradise that has plenty of underwater levels, some of which go into the abyss. The last level slash world is the shortest, Gamble Galaxy, with only 4 stages, but it's still one of the most spectacular in terms of visuals. And I just love the space vibe and all the asteroids you see. Overall, the graphics, while nothing groundbreaking, do stand up, and there's a lot of little details, like how in with the red spray paint, fighter's red headband becomes white, and all the idle animations that the various abilities get, like magic. Now let's go on to the other half of the presentation, the music, and see how that has aged and see if it's good. Alright, so much like with Kirby's Canvas Curse, a lot of the music in this title is remixes and returning music, including the most iconic, that's being Prism Plains theme, which is comes from Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, albeit it's a little higher pitched. Same with the, you know, encounters in Jam Jungle stages that, kind of sound good too. DDD's theme is also great to hear again, and I just love it. It's always enjoyable. However, despite this, there are still a great number of new tracks. The Cushy Clouds theme is really nice, having a good feeling to it thanks to the melody consisting of 2 parts. The first is a very springier intro with a C major and a 6/8, while the second is, perfectly shifting to a minor. Another one is seen in the world Stormcloud, which is a lot more drum and bass focused. The legendary Halberd theme here is really understandably militaristic and amazing, yet sadly never returned outside of Kirby's Rainbow Curse. And I think that's a shame, as it fits really well with the other Meta Knight musical tracks, and I think could have added a little more diversity than eventually got used in the series. The theme of Vocal Volcano is very sinister and has a bit of a mobster vibe to it, thanks to the utilization of a glockenspiel. Ice Island's theme is a bit forgettable, though it uses some really neat techniques. The Uncanny Underground is the theme heard in certain underground stages. It's very creepy. I'm not gonna, say it's amazing, but it's, interesting. Gamble Galaxy theme is just very triumphant and sort of has a very 1950s space rock vibe. The title music is very fitting, though more in the light tone. And I gotta say, the final boss's theme you get when you fight Dark Nebula is pretty But the best music of the game relates to the Squeak Squad. The theme that starts when Kirby grabs a large treasure chest is like having the Bloods and Crisps burst into your living room. Oh yeah, style. And really gets you ready to beat the heck out of somebody. Overall, the music is perfectly okay. There are some highlights, but honestly, there isn't a lot new here that I think people really take note of. Now let's go on and cover the many foes that Kirby will face on this adventure. Starting with the common abilityless enemies, you got many returning foes, such as Waddle Dee, who also comes in a big obese version. Due to being enormously fat, it requires a super inhale to suck up, but it's still very easy to kill. There's also a golden variety called Gold Waddle Dee that will flee Kirby, and you have to kill it before it kills itself in order to unlock a treasure chest. And it runs fast, like a crackhead running from the police. There are 7 in the game. Other returning foes include Snooker, Scarfy, Shotzo, the Cannon, Blipper, Blockin, Chip, Bronto Burt, Glunk, Batty, and Gordo. Blockin. There are several new common enemies too, such as Grimp, a wall climbing thing that sort of shoots peas or orbs at Kirby. Kret is a cloudy thing that drops exploding coconuts at Kirby. Parara is this blue sort of amoeba disc guy who kind of just looks like a worm, and it will either hover in place or try and land on Kirby. Myga is a greenish blob that can't be inhaled, but unlike Scarfy, is very easy to kill. And there's Gusa, a very swordfish-like creature that will aggressively charge at Kirby, but can get stuck in walls. But the most notable of the new copy ability-less enemies is Uja, a shadowy sort of swarm of insects. Indeed, the name is actually a Japanese onomatopoeia for bees swarming. It can transform into two forms, and one of which looks like Master Hand, and the second is a scimitar-like one. And it'll try to hurt Kirby by touch or slicing at him. But it's, very easily swallowed, though it does have a lot of health, so unless you swallow it, it can be a little hard to defeat otherwise. I wish it'd come back, and I do think it may have partially inspired the, new forms that Master and Crazy Hand took in, the later Smash Bros. Just maybe. Moving on to the copyability bearing common enemies, there are many returning foes, including Wheelie that gives Wheel, Waddle Doo that gives Beam, Biospark that gives Ninja, Boxing that gives Fighter, Sword Knight and Heavy Knight that both give Sword, Laser Ball that gives Laser, Twister that gives Tornado, Sparky that gives, Spark, Starman that gives High Jump, Cupid that gives Cupid, Foley that gives Bomb, Naughty that gives Sleep, Paracel that gives Paracel, Pengy that gives Ice. There's Sir Kibble that gives Cutter, and Flamer that gives Fire, as well as Hothead that also gives Fire. There's the UFO that gives UFO. Speaking of Hothead, he's joined by two different variants. First is the obese salamander-like Akchi, which is a reference to the old myth that salamanders are born out of fire. In reality, they often would hibernate in wood, so when you set it on fire, they'd flee. Bubblehead is a far less threatening version that gives Bubble. Bun is a giant bunny head that requires a super inhale and will try and grab Kirby and fling him away. As for the other new guys, you got Gaga, who's sort of a ferret slash weasel mole guy that gives Animal, and Metalon is a, very blocky, multi-sided boulder of metal that will slowly roll at Kirby and gives metal. Very easy to dodge, not that much of a threat. Overall, the common enemies of this game are fine. Sure, some of the new ones are a bit forgettable, especially those without copy abilities, but they're kind of neat. Now let's go on to something a little bigger, the mini-bosses. Starting with the returning ones, you got Bonkers, who gives Hammer, and functions like he's always done up to this point, with him using his gorilla physique to try and smash Kirby with a hammer, as well as toss explosive coconuts. Overall fun, but nothing new. Same for Mr. Frosty, who gives ice, and will charge to Kirby and spit out ice blocks at him, which can be sucked up and spat back out at him. Did you know that they misspelled his name in Kirby in the Amazing Mirror as Mr. Flosty? I didn't notice that when I reviewed it, but I learned it while, researching this game, so, cool. Boxer is this walking, decapitated doghead who gives Fighter, and he returns and functions like last time, leaping around, doing Hadoukens, and punching at Kirby. The last returning mini-boss is Boxy, who gives magic, and she functions the same, charging at Kirby, jumping around, and spitting out boxes that can be inhaled to spit back out at her and can be opened to reveal stuff. But what is in those boxes are different in this game. In my experience, is mostly Waddle Dees. Going on to the new guys, you got the first big Metalon, who, true to its name, is sort of a bigger version of Metalon and, gives metal, whose only form of attack is rolling at Kirby. He's freaking slow, though, and you have to try to get hurt by this guy, and it's pretty much a big pushover. Buboo is a crab that coats itself in bubbles, which is something that crabs don't really do, but it is based on some real life incidents of how they can spit out bubbles. It has three attacks. One is that it will, float around and shoot bubbles at you. The other time, it will stand in place and shower bubbles on Kirby. And the other, it will lose its bubbly clothing and just run around. Overall, it's a fun, if a bit easy of a fight, and it gives, the pretty mediocre copy ability, that being bubbles. So it's fine, I guess. Then you got Tedhond, which is a just a generic sort of ghost guy that has a pointed wizard hat. So that's cool. It'll summon two mini ghosts that will then try and explode on Kirby. And, it's honestly not that memorable, and it gives a really weak copy ability, that being Ghost, so boo. Luckily, the last of the new mini bosses is much better. Gao Gao is a large blue bear slash weasel guy that will attack by lunging at Kirby and doing these sort of spin attacks. He does get dizzy, offering a chance to strike back at him, but it's still a really engaging fight, and I just love this guy. He has an amazing design and a really engaging encounter, and obviously, as you might expect, gives the animal ability. Before I go to the bosses, I think I should go to the main baddies, the Squeak Squad or the Squeaks, that sort of straddle the line, as they have members that are common enemies, mini bosses, and full on bosses. First are the Squeakers. These are the kind of glorified regular enemy Waddle Dees of the group. They can steal big treasure, but you gotta kind of let them. Plus, even if they do, all you get is a mook rush when you enter into their lair. There's three color variants. Yellow ones will hop at Kirby, green ones throw multiple bombs, and blue ones throw fewer bombs, but they have a bigger explosion. Honestly, they're all kind of pathetic. I wish they had included the red one, though. That would have, added a little more variety. The three big guys, however, are much tougher to deal with and act as full-blown mini-bosses, so let's go to them now. Starting with the brawn, you got Storo, who will use his girth to try and bump or crush Kirby. He'll also pull out a hammer, which can be knocked out of his hand and inhaled for the hammer ability. It's fun fight, but a bit easy to cheese, especially if you use fire. Going to Spinny, who is the speeder of the group, he will often try to race Kirby using his high speed to try and get to the treasure first. And unlike the other guys, can actually swim. As for the fight itself, well, he'll try to hit Kirby by throwing ninja stars at him or using his claws up close. Though both can be inhaled, and they give either ninja or the animal if, swallowed. A fun fight, all in all. Lastly, we got Doc, who is the brains of the group. He pilots a UFO, which can drop bombs that give the bomb ability if inhaled, shoot a laser gun, which, can be dropped and inhaled for laser, and if enough damage is done to Doc, he'll even be knocked out of the UFO, which then can be inhaled and give Kirby the OP UFO ability. It's a real fun fight, as his mobility leads to a great amount of challenge. And you actually fight him as two of the bosses, as well as Doroch. But now let's get on to the true bosses. Starting with the returning foes, there's interestingly no Wispy Woods equivalent in this game, which is unique among the Kirby games overall. Instead, we got King Deity as the first boss. He fights like he did in Kirby's Nightmare Dreamland, but is made extremely easy. Firstly, he flinches at every attack, thus resetting him, and he has way less health or defense. Midnight also returns as the seventh boss, but unlike the king, he's actually not completely castrated, and functions a lot like he did in earlier games. Several differences include how his attacks now leave stars behind that can be spat back out at him or swallowed to get sword. He also doesn't offer a sword, likely due to wanting to protect Kirby and from the chest. He also has new attacks like a fire infused crescent shot and a plasma induced down thrust that overall leads to a fun fight that really stands out. I liked King Dedede too, but compared to this, I think that Meta Knight's just generally a really fun fight. I also like the little detail about how the background of the halberd shows it rising from the ocean abyss into the abyss of space, showing the real dynamicism of this fight. But now let's go over the new bosses. Starting with the second boss, we got Mrs. Moley, who is a female giant mole who emerges out of one of four holes, two of which are in the foreground and two in the back. From there, she will throw out several objects, including seeds, a screw, a rock, a bomb that gives bomb, a burning oil drum that gives, fire, a tire that gives wheel, and a red spiky ball that gives cutter. Overall, it's a bit of a harder challenge than Dee, but still, it's pretty easy. And I have to wonder though, as she lives so far from Molly, even though I think it's implied that they're married, I don't know, maybe they had a divorce or something. The fifth boss is Mecha Krako, aka the Krako fight of this game, though in reality it's a mech piloted by Doc. This is only revealed after you beat the first phase. Speaking of the first phase, it's a lot like your standard Krako fight. It flies around, shoots sparks at Kirby, as well as lightning, and will summon enemies like Starman, Waddledees, or Waddle-Doos. The second phase is more aggressive, and he will surround himself with lightning and destroy the platform Kirby is standing on, only to resummon it with more holes. It's a real fun fight and a neat take on a common foe, in my humble opinion. The fourth boss, Yadgain, is this giant hermit crab-like mech that honestly stands out and is kind of creepy looking. It will claw at the ground after Kirby as it's sort of an auto-scroller, and it throws out rock fragments and causes rocks to fall from the ceiling. It can also shoot out a laser from its mouth. It's a unique fight in design, though not that hard or my favorite. I do like how you increasingly disable it though as you fight it and cause it more damage. And I kind of like Hermit Crab, so pretty interesting, I guess. The fifth boss is the giant fire owl Bobo, who has like a raccoon tanuki tail. I kind of think it should have been another mech tied to the Squeak Squad, or maybe just a boss in general tied to it, as it just comes off as a random inclusion here. It will try to grab Kirby to throw him into the lava pit. It's really not that hard or memorable, but man, the next fight of the sixth world, Roach, the leader of the Squeak Squad, more than makes up for all of the previous fights. And man, he's just really awesome. He'll use his staff to sort of spawn a trilogy of stars at Kirby that will bounce off the walls. He'll also throw a bomb that will, explode, and he'll also just go teleport spam and fire an ice laser. It's honestly really enjoyable and a real challenge. Plus, his stylish red hood and hat make him very fancy. But when he becomes the Dark Darroach, he's even more powerful, in addition to sporting a now purplish cloak and darker fur, which honestly just makes him look cooler. His fight is mostly the same, admittedly, but is much stronger, and he has more health, or at least more defense in my experience. His new attacks also are more powerful. Firstly, he teleport spams way more, and he attacks with his triple star rod a lot more. His bombs leave a giant fiery pillar, and his ice beam is faster and more girthy, thus harder to dodge. He may not have the most radical change, but I still think he would have been a better final boss than what we actually got. Indeed, the real final boss, Dark Nebula, just kind of lame. Probably the most forgettable final boss in Kirby history that isn't, a spin off with DDD in it. Firstly, in terms of design, it's a Black Patrick. No, not that scary at all. Though the inclusion of the three elements are a neat touch. The fight itself is also kind of pathetic. He'll kind of just, hover around, and he has three attacks for each of the elements. His fire form sees him become surrounded in flames, and he'll charge at Kirby. The electric attack has him summon electricity to the corners of the screen while moving in a sort of upwards and downwards manner. And lastly, the ice form attacks having him sort of move in a circular pattern, as well as shooting ice beams at Kirby that are kind of easy to dodge, arguably even easier to dodge than Dark Adoroach. And it doesn't even have a second form. I mean, come on, man. That it was such a missed opportunity to make him look truly evil. It's just pathetic and such a disappointment. In the Japanese original, he's called Zero Three and is the ruler of the underworld, according to the lore. But man, I just don't see it. This guy, outside of having a single eye, doesn't look like dark matter at all. And frankly, I think he couldn't possibly rule the underworld since he's imprisoned in a chest for most of the time. And it's just kind of disappointing, honestly. Now let us go on to the completion requirements and my final thoughts on this game. Alright, so completing this game is actually pretty straightforward compared to other Kirby games. Simply collect all 120 treasures, by extension being the game, as the last treasure is something you unlock via defeating the final boss. In the community, beating the extra mode, bosses, and minigames is considered somewhat of an informal 200% completion, but don't feel you have to do that. But you should, as I think you'll get the most out of the game by doing so. Interestingly, there was some skins for the stomach that Kirby has that you could only get during a limited timed event in Japan via some DS station pop-ups at electric and specialty stores in Japan. I didn't really know where to fit that, but it's kind of interesting. Sort of a completion thing that you'll never actually be able to do, but it's kind of neat. As for my final thoughts, well, it's complicated. As I do have somewhat of a nostalgia, and in terms of the story, presentation, and basic gameplay, I think this game is serviceable, if not exactly, blowing anyone out of the water. And I do think it introduced some elements that are, pretty good and would go on to become staples, like how Spark and Plasma are sort of combined into one, or how this was the first game where there was a large number of collectibles where only a few were needed in order to unlock the final boss. Speaking of the treasure, I also think it's a step up from last time, but is that really saying much given how poorly treasures were implemented in Kirby and the Amazing Mirror? Despite that, praise, there are many things in this game that are mediocre. This includes most of the new copy abilities, the final boss, the, utilization of the ability scrolls, the combination abilities, and how a lot of the enemy designs are just kind of forgettable. You know what will be good in terms of an analogy here? Does anyone remember the original New Super Mario Bros., especially the one on the DS? It's basically like that, but for the Kirby series. Luckily, unlike that short-lived series, it didn't go down that way, further churning out endless unoriginal sequels, but I'd say that it's still the weakest of the mainline Kirby games, looking at it objectively and removing my nostalgic bias. As for if you should play it, well, despite what I said before, it's still a solid game, so yeah, I'd say you should try it if you can. Though sadly, there's only really two ways to play it legally. There's the original DS release, and then there was a re-release for the Wii U Virtual Console. First on January 25th, 2015 in the EU and Oceania, then on July 30th, 2015 in North America, and lastly in Japan on September 9th, 2015. Overall, it's a fine game, but only feel like completing it if you want to. Don't feel like you have to. You can easily skip this game. It's nothing horrible, but it's also nothing outstanding. Definitely the low point in the series if we ignore the promotional games. Anyway, if you liked this video, you liked it, but if you loved it, consider subscribing and sharing it around, and have a wonderful day.